there was some on medical release for folks who are getting on in years and in jail and experiencing medical issues. That was another section of the bill. And then, of course, re-entry and reducing recidivism. And this is where there's a fair amount of attention to making sure that folks have access to getting credentials while they're incarcerated, education, the like. Again, Franklin County Sheriff's Department is a great example of the number of courses and offerings and counseling and substance abuse groups and that are in there locally and making sure it's happening everywhere. But that's another piece. And of course, making sure that there's follow-up and so that when folks need assistance with housing and jobs, that there's the ability to do that. That largely is the kind of the high-level sections. What I think is worth dwelling on a bit is that it was very, oh no, there is one more section, which is essentially, now the prosecutor's side and law enforcement side is also actually asking for things as well, and that means increasing their authorities when it came to intimidation and whatnot. And so there were elements that it became more of a package to say, look, we need to update other provisions so that we can actually go after serious criminals at the same time. And so I say that as, here's the package of a very deliberate attempt by the Senate Judiciary Chair to say, if we're going to present this to the House and to the governor, we want to be able to say, this is the result of years of work that says we have a problem and there are areas that are overlapping interests from whether it's law enforcement and prosecutors and advocates to say, this package is strong, it passed the Senate with a large number of votes, and now you need to be considering all of these elements. And so you'll see that unfolding in the coming week, really, which is how far is the House going to go and how does that compare to the Senate? We've heard some positive remarks from the House Speaker, but we also understand that it will not go as far as the Senate. And so what becomes the really important piece, which you just heard, is the conference committee when both the basically representatives of the House and the Senate sit together. There's 6 members, and they'll say, okay, let's give and take. Sure, we didn't have this, but you had this in yours, and we like this, but not that. And so that is where the rubber's going to hit the road, ladies and gentlemen. That's where we're going to see the real result of this effort. And of course the governor, but my experience is that's where it's going to matter. And so you'll see that both sides have committed to create that conference committee before Thanksgiving, and then we assume maybe in the very start of the new year it'll get to the governor's desk. Now, I just wanted to close with a few remarks about what I'm increasingly calling an important moment for changing our social contract, right? And by this, in my experience working again with youth in Pittsfield, I found a bit of a disconnect. Sometimes law enforcement and kids and families and communities we're working with were on the same page. And in that case, you can point to things like, you know what, drugs are hurting our neighborhoods and police presence can help give space to kids to be kids. It was in the overlap of saying that, we have a lot of mental health issues happening. We have, again, I guess some of the earlier comments that I talked about. And yet there was also just as often a concerning disconnect, right? And so community members and kids and their families would say and articulate very clearly, there's a lack of understanding from others that we're experiencing the direct impact of generations of discriminatory policies right here in this country. And getting that narrative through, it hasn't happened yet, as far as I'm concerned. And so I think everyone in this room knows what I'm talking about. I mean, whether it's Jim Crow, whether it's federal policies that wouldn't allow for loans to African-American families or black businesses, and the result being a lack of transfer of wealth from generation to generation. And oh, by the way, we know the implications of growing up in poverty, and you can point very clearly, the data shows this, to a resulting decrease in lifelong earnings, result in lower education attainment, result in health outcomes. And so there is not a coincidence here, right? And so, but getting that narrative across continues to be challenging. At the same time, of course, the police would come to me and say, yeah, Adam, but, you know, others don't get what we're going through. We're now watching more handguns on the street than we've ever seen. We've seen more youth using those handguns than I've seen in my career. We've seen a whole range of social ills coming at us, and we're expected to confront them, but, you know, look, it's an addiction, it's other results of poverty, and I'm just trying to do my job, and it's harder and harder for me to just get home safely to my family. And so that's why when you have these two views, and I think it's relevant at the national level, it strikes me that that social contract, an original social contract, the classic social contract is one where you give up some rights in exchange for the state protecting the rest. So you don't commit crimes, but you are guaranteed equal opportunity. You know, you're guaranteed equality. And that bargain has not been held up, right? That's exactly what we're seeing right now, is that there's when your ability, your access to equal opportunity is determined by the wealth of your parents, that bargain hasn't been held up. And there's nothing more un-American than that, quite frankly. And so that's why I feel like that this process has been an effort to try to bridge that gap. It's trying to say, there are very specific elements that we have not gotten right as a country and as a Commonwealth, and we better be very clear on how we're dissecting those and dissecting the impact of the war on drugs and its impact on communities of color and communities experiencing poverty. This is a very specific effort to try to get at that. And so I think that needs to be understood clearly. And, well, I lost my train of thought at the end, but I'm sure that was going to be good. And so I think that that's the element of where this needs to go. And I think that there's a rare opportunity, once in a generation opportunity in Massachusetts to actually get at these issues. And so it certainly is my hope that we'll see this in the rest of the legislature and with the governor. But with that, why don't I open it up for 6 minutes of questions. So, thanks a lot, everyone.